My name is Michael McKenna. I'm a member of the Hammond Tea Club. We began our journey in Chanoyu and the tea ceremony last May with an overview of this program, The Elements of Tea, where we are each month on the fourth Tuesday at 7 o'clock. We have been for 4 times now, today the fifth time, picking up one element of the tea ceremony and looking at it over the course of an hour. So in May, we had an overview. In June, we had a session on the dewy path on the garden, the tea garden that leads the way to the tea house. In July, we had a session on the scroll, the host hint as to the theme of the meeting. In August last month, we had a session about chabana, the tea flowers that are a special way of bringing the seasons into the tea room itself. And today, we'll do a deep dive into the bowls that the host prepares the tea in. Our session today is led by two tea people, who will lead us through a history and a deep background of these tea bowls. The first part of tonight's presentation will be led by Matsuko Otsuka. She began her study of tea with her grandmother, then her mother. She studied both Ura Senkei and Omote Senkei tea, and we'll talk about some of the deep history of the tea bowls and how the historical background in Japan has influenced the style of the tea bowls themselves. Her presentation will be followed by Hisashi Miyao, who's a 30-year veteran of life in the United States here, born in Japan. He has been studying tea since 2007 in the Urasenkei Chanoyu Center on the east side of New York. He's himself a businessman, an entrepreneur, the president of the H. Miyao Corporation that deals in creative culture and commerce between Japan and the rest of the world. So we're going to begin our presentation now with Otsuka-san's portion of the presentation. After Miyao-san completes his part, we will have questions and a discussion after that. So take it away, folks.
Hello, my name is Matsuko Otsuka, and together with Hisashi Miyao, we are going to be presenting the elements of tea bowl, or CHAWAN. We're very excited to talk about the tea bowl, or CHAWAN, because these are probably the very first tea utensils most people will purchase once they start practicing tea. They are very intimate. You hold them in your hands, you put your lips on it, you drink from it. Tea bowls move freely between the host and the guest during the tea ceremony, and you can get it from different parts of Japan or different parts of the countries. Before we talk about tea bowl presentation, I wanted to give you a brief index of how we're going to present our discussion. So we're going to talk about history, and our assumption is that the force in the history tend to shape what is considered beautiful, what is considered it, what is considered in vogue. So we're going to look at different forces that were in play throughout the history of Japan. I'm going to be talking about pre-Muromachi era to Edo era, and Hisashi will be talking about modern era, and we're going to do CHAWAN or tea bowl talk after our presentation. And just for a disclaimer, I wanted to let you guys know that we're not scholar, we are not the historian. We are two tea enthusiasts, and we've been practicing tea. So this is our own point of view, and it's not a scholarly discussion. We also wanted to let you know that, as you know, that as soon as new archaeological discoveries are made, history tends to change. So this is our point of view from what we know now. And I am making very simple representation of what kind of historical forces were in place during this era, but it is by means not mutually exclusive. There are different forces is happening, but I'm looking at what might be the strongest force during a certain period. So tea bowl, as I was discussing earlier, the concept of beauty, or what is considered beautiful at that time, is shaped by forces during an era. What kind of force are we talking about? We are talking about historical, social values, economical activities, lifestyle, wars, peacetime. All this shape what are considered beautiful at that time. So we're going to look at the historical forces, and then we'll refer back to what was considered valuable and beautiful at that time. So outline of history, I'm going to touch on pre-Muromachi era. These were a period in Japan, aristocrats and emperors were controlling the country. At the same time, there were rise of warlords, so there were different forces were in place. In Muromachi era, you will see the blend of aristocrats, emperor, and warlords type of aesthetic blend. And then also during Muromachi era, trade with China restarted. In Sengoku era, Civil War era, which lasted 150 years, depending on who is counting. And those were time social structure were completely destroyed, and samurai were upwardly mobile, and you also see Zen culture and samurai culture in place. And you will also see appreciation for simpler and rustic beauty. And Edo era, that is the peacetime, Japan was consolidated, and you will see rise of commoners during the peacetime. And Hisashi will talk about modern era Japan, where influence of Western culture is more dominant. So pre-Muromachi era, we're talking about around mid-14th century or so, aristocrats and emperors dominated social political culture. They were elegant, subtle, seasonal beauty, changing beauty. Those were appreciated, very ornamental, and society was stable. Who your parents were, who your father was, who your mother was, they pretty much dictated your career. So life wasn't as turmoil as it was during the Civil War time. So at the same time, they were warlords or samurai class. They started to have power. So samurais, they used to be security guards hired by the riches. the emperors, the aristocrats, powerful Buddhist temple would hire the security guards. But samurai started to realize, well, we have all the power, we have the weapons. Why should we fight for these people? We should rise up. So rise of warlords have given different force and military power to Japan, and the strengths were determined by your power, your ability to fight. And they have developed their own capital in the east as opposed to Kyoto in the west. And they had created their own samurai culture. And Zen Buddhists also had worked with the samurai, so they had their own cultural forces in place in the east. However, during the time, there was still some reference to your ancestry. Did you come from Heike? Did you come from Genji, who was your great-grandfather was? That were in place too. So Muromachi era, this is the first time where samurai warlords, military government had moved their capital from the east to the west, to Kyoto. So interesting thing is, unlike other countries, military regime did not get rid of all the loyalty, all the riches. They coexisted, but they coexisted in a different district. Muromachi shogun moved his capital to Kyoto, and you will see Kitayama and Higashiyama culture. So when you go to Kyoto, the most famous temple is Ginkakuji, the golden temple, and the silver temple. So those were created during this era. In Kitayama and Higashiyama culture, you'll see the blend of aristocrat, warlords aesthetic combined with Zen Buddhism. And also during this time, shoguns restarted import from China. So Chinese imports became very highly valued. Karamono literally means Chinese imports. They were ornamental, decorative. Those were valued. And tea parties started to show off your treasures. So multiple courses of meals, games, poetry, music, dance. People would go to the people's house, and it's an all-day party. And the tea, unlike now where host actually makes tea, dedicated staffers would make tea and serve guests. You can see in this section, you will see a person who is in monk robe. He is making tea, and you'll see beautiful ornaments displayed in alcove, and all the guests and hosts are gathering and they're having a good time. That was how our tea party was. I would like to turn over to the examples of karamono tea bowls. So what you see right now is CHAWAN or tea bowl called Yuteki or Yuteki Tenmoku tea bowl from Muromachi period. And these bowls were fired in Kenyo kiln in the northern part of Hunan, China. I wanted to discuss a little bit about interesting aspects of antique tea bowls. As some of you may be aware of, the wooden box that contain these tea bowls sometimes worth more, or at least as valuable as what's inside. So this wooden box often have a signature of previous owners of the tea bowls, or a famous tea person gives name to the tea bowls. So not only you admire the tea bowls, but you also admire the tea box. And one of my earlier tea party the assistant who came to me saw all these boxes laying around, and she said, why don't you just throw them away and you can just put it in a container neatly so you can save a lot of space. So I was like, please don't throw away the boxes, because sometimes in tea parties, after we look at tea bowls, we look at the tea box. So this particular Karamono tea bowl, you can see silver spots emerge inside and outside of the bowl, covered by jet black glaze, except for the small foot area that you can see. The name Yuteki derives from this beautiful shape of spots that look like oil drops. Yuteki literally means oil drops. And the tea bowls with black glaze baked in kenyo kilns are called kensan. Kensan is considered to be the best bowl for tea in China. And the name already appears in the literature of the Kamakura period in Japan. Kamakura period was right before Muromachi period. So kensan has a thin, short, linear pattern on the black glazed surface, like nogi, millet, a gramineous plant. That is why kensan is also called nogime. Among these kensan bowls, those with spots that emerged as a result of the recrystallization of the minerals in glaze were called yuteki. So you're looking at the example of yuteki or oil drop tea bowl. So during the Muromachi period, there is actually a manual on how to decorate the room using these Chinese import. This manual, created by Muromachi Shogun, is called Kuntai Kanso Choki, through which we can see people's value at that time. So the first part of the book provides evaluation of painters and their specialized themes. They criticize, they put in order of importance. And in the latter half of the book, there is a section on showing or study room where description of Chinese tea containers and tea bowls are given as a decoration items used in showing or study room. In this latter half of the section of the manual, there are description of tenmoku or tenmoku CHAWAN under the heading of earthware. According to the description, the best earthware at that time is yohen, and the second best is yuteki. So you're looking at the second best tea bowl described in the Muromachi Shogun manual of how to decorate room. So the box that contained this tea bowl has yuteki and tenmoku written in sumi, and they say that it was written probably by either Senno Rikyu or Furuta Oribe. Both are very famed tea practitioners. They both, incidentally, were ordered to be killed. This tea bowl was possessed by Matsudaira Humai, a feudal lord and master of the tea ceremony in the late Edo period. And in his storehouse catalog called Unshu Kuracho Daimeibutsu, the bowl is recorded as Yuteki Koshiki Doi Shikatsu Kinoshita Fushimiya. So among Yuteki bowl, this one stands out for its beauty and tenmuk shape and magnificent Yuteki spot. So as I briefly described earlier, this box contains the previous owners who had possessed this priceless valuable. You're again looking at example of Karamoto. This time, not only you're looking at the tenmoku tea bowl, I wanted to show you the beautiful stand that often go with the tea bowl. Usually tea bowl has a stand that are used exclusively for that particular tea bowl. This one has beautiful inlay and it's very intricate work. And now I want to show you another Karamono Celadon porcelain flower bowl. This is Southern Songguan Ware, and it was said to be manufactured around 12th, 13th century. And this bowl has an elegant and artless appearance with a firm curvature on the sides. There are 6 notches on the rim, together making a round flower or rinka shape. The wall is very thin, so it shows the skill sets of the artist who created it, with the notches made from outer side across the rim. There are some spots filled with metal along the rim, apparently made to fix the cracks. The entire rim is covered with a metal stripe for protection. The glaze on the bottom of the foot has been removed, showing the dark gray color of the clay. The glaze, as you can see, is light and clear blue, but because of the dark gray color of the clay underneath, you can see the depths of the color. The natural beauty of the cracks of the glaze called kenyu is worth of specific mention. They are niju or double kanyu, the narrow shiny white kanyu or crack between the thicker black cracks. This feature adds a mysterious air to the pieces. This is an excellent example of work of Celadon porcelain that came to Japan, which became publicly known when it was presented at the Oyama family's auction held at Kanazawa Art Society in 1934. This bowl has been considered to be one of the best pieces of porcelain ware produced by the Jiaotan Guanyu, the production site of ceramics and porcelain for the imperial court in the Southern Song period. And there is a little bit of controversy. It was pointed out later that it could be a production of Shunaiji Guanyu area, which precedes the Jiaotan area, and judging from the characteristic of shape and structure. So even though we do study and we make guesstimate of where it might have been produced, when it was produced, sometimes contrary evidence point us to different direction, and scholars argue back and forth about the origin or the time period. So Sengoku era followed Muromachi era. This is a civil war period. Depending on who is counting, this is 100 to 150 years of civil war. Culture was completely destroyed upward. Mobile samurai people were fighting to gain power. Father was fighting their children. Children are fighting their uncles. They were killing. And if you think about 100 to 150 years of civil war, it's daunting. And all the rich people fled the city of Kyoto because Kyoto was destroyed. And so there were a lot of war heroes during the times that emerged. Nobunaga, Oda Nobunaga is one of the characters. And he was one of the first samurai warlord to realize the value of tea party over and beyond having a good time. He used tea party as a team building exercise for his newly acquired allies and subordinate. So he would gather all his allies and subordinate for tea party before the war. And you want to be invited to his tea party. So you work really hard. And after the war, he would also organize another tea party where the people who had worked really hard are praised. So that was how it was used. And he also realized the power of merchants. Merchants financed the war. Merchants also were the first one to find out what is going on in different parts of Japan. So merchants can give you the information. Like this warlord started to buy a lot of weapons. This warlord started to sell off his Chinese imports, and he is trying to gain cash. So that kind of information is very important. Nobunaga realized it, and he had made close allies with these powerful merchants. And he also appointed, he and another warlord, he had appointed Senno Rikyu as his tea practitioners to organize his tea utensils and then also organize tea parties. Senno Rikyu is probably the most famous tea person now, and he has produced Raku tea bowl. He had Chojiro, Raku Chojiro, create a tea bowl that's very simple, rustic, using the clay that is really made to serve green tea. If you ever drink from Raku tea bowl, you'll see that the clay retains heat, and it's also not so hot to the touch if you drink green tea from that tea bowl. And also Korean tea bowls were quote unquote discovered. They were simpler and rustic and perhaps resonated with the samurai class or Zen Buddhist aesthetic. Also kuniyaki, the kilns, domestic kilns from outside of Kyoto had started to gain popularity. So I would like to show you a couple of examples of Korean tea bowls. This one it's called Kizaemon, and it was said to be produced around 1560s century. You can see the aesthetics has drastically changed from Chinese import. They're not symmetric. They actually don't use glaze, they use clays to decorate. There has been common understanding these tea bowls were originally probably used for daily kitchenware, to eat bowl of rice, to contain food at altar. And the tea practitioner from Japan had discovered it, and they started using for tea. And later on, they have either had it produced in Korea with a specific order from Japan, or the Korean craftsmen were living in Japan and they were creating these tea bowl. But these, you can see the very quiet, very earthy beauty of Korean bowl. And this tea bowl, belonging to the Oido type, is large and deep and has a majestic appearance. It stands on a slightly splayed foot and has a wide flaring body which strongly retains marks of the wheel on the interior side with traces of swirls on the bottom. The bowl is covered in a glaze of slightly blue hue with scattered air bubbles appearing as white spots, but there is no crawling along the base of the foot, which is often seen in Edo type tea bowl. This one is said to have been coming from Joseon Dynasty, 16th century. And Raku is one of the most famed tea bowl in Japan. There is a family who's, I believe they're in like 17th generation, and his original person who started Raku, Chojiro, worked collaboratively with Senno Rikyu to create first dedicated tea bowl. And if you have ever green tea from Raku tea bowl, you can see that this tea bowl retains heat, but it doesn't feel so hot to the touch. So it creates perfect tea bowl. And this one is said to be made about 16th century, and it's called Muichimotsu. And you see, this is a red clay they used to create this beautiful color. The Muichimotu is the name of this tea bowl. And then also Black Raku, Oguro, both were probably most famous Raku tea bowl. And Sengoku had ordered to have this made with a specific measurement. And it feels very warm to the touch. It's very rustic. It's simple. And when you put green tea inside, it really pops. So this tea bowl is one of the examples of what they call kuniaki, or domestic kilns, that are popping up outside of Kyoto. And these tea bowls in the Oribe styles were often shaped something like ancient clogs and described as kutsugata, or clog shaped. So the way they make this shape is after a round tea bowl had been formed on the wheel, then they literally indent them in several places, destroying the circular shape and producing a symmetric form. The exterior surface of the bowl was then worked with a spatula to make it rough and uneven. So the flamboyant distortion and irregularities of this type characterize the aesthetic of Oribe ware. This tea bowl's vital, organic seeming forms is paired with vigorous surface design. The rich iron black glaze that covers most of the bowl frames the patterns in the white area. Inside the bowl, each diamond-shaped compartment of the grid is filled with either the representational depiction of a flower or a stylized motif resembling a plum blossom. On the exterior, various geometric patterns are boldly depicted in forceful black wash. Oribe ware that is mostly glazed in iron black and carries design in black on the reverse white ground, such as this tea bowl, is called Black Oribe or Kuro Oribe. Oribe ware that is entirely glazed in iron black is known as Oribe Black or Oribe Kuro. So you can see that this is almost like modern art theme going on. And this is another example of kuniaki, or domestic kiln. It is said to be made about 16th, 17th century in Momoyama era. And it's called Yamanoha. And you can also see like a similarity of the patterns that are almost modern art or depiction of the natural shape. So I was speaking with a tea person who has told me that in that period, if you're a samurai or warlord, you are in the military. Military doesn't allow any personalization, that you have to follow order. There is no room for your originality. So as more and more warlords or samurai start practicing tea, they wanted to find a way they could express their personality in a safe way. So in the safety of tea room, they can pick objects that most express their inner personality. So you started to see differentiating object, their different designs started to to become popular because there are more people wants to individualize their tea artifacts. And during Edo era, war ended and Tokugawa consolidated Japan. And you're going to see what happens during the peacetime. There is no longer war. Well, there's some, but much less war. And well-to-do civilians started to enjoy prosperity that was brought by the peacetime. Civilians, women started to practice tea, and that became a little more ornamental. The aesthetic become a little more towards the ornamental aesthetic. So kyoyaki, porcelain with ornamental patterns, emerged. And one of the most So I'm going to show you example of Ninse teaware. This is overglazed tea bowl with design of triangle tiles and waves. And this is said to be made by Ninse. So slightly squeezed body with a rounded rim that waves gently, the form favored by tea master Kanamori Sowa. He's a famed tea master. And also daimyo. This bowl is white glaze on the inside, and on the outside, 8 rolls of triangle tiles cover the entire surface, with a deliberate application of green glaze thrown from the bottom to the top to effect organic patterning. The colored triangles are also tiled inside in gold. The base is thinly formed, bearing his branding inside. The provenance of the Meiji clan is now being displayed at MoMA Museum of Art. This pair made by Ninse is a pair of nesting tea bowls. The one decorated with the gold lozenges made smaller to fit in the one with the silver lozenges. Very thinly potted, they have the slightest swell at the waist, giving a softness to their shape. The design, which is strikingly and most original among Ninse's works, is believed to reflect the taste of Kanamori Sowa, again a very famed tea master at that time. The interior surface is covered with the black glaze, while the exterior surface has lozenge patterns on a white ground in the upper portion and motifs of lotus flower in the lower portion. Both bowls have a small stamp marked of Ninse impressed on the foot. And these tea bowls were made as a gift to be presented to Tofukumon-in, the wife of Emperor Go-Mizuno. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Hisashi for modern tea.
Thank you, Hatsuko. From here, I'd like to take over the presentation for Meiji era in Japan, which is 1868 to 1912. Let me talk a little bit about a historical background of Japan in this era. During the international openness of the Meiji era, Japanese arts and crafts had a new audience and set of influences. Traditional patterns, such as the samurai daimyo class, broke away, and many of the artisans lost their source of income. The government took an active interest in the art export market to promote Japanese arts at world fairs, such as Vienna World Fair in 1873. Most of the works promoted internationally were in the decorative arts, including pottery. This is the Satsuma ware, which was made for Paris Export, 1867. Satsuma ware was a name originally given to pottery from Satsuma province in Japan. It was elaborately decorated with overglazed enamels and gilding. These wares were highly praised in the West. The style actually owed a lot to imported pigments and Western influences, and had been created with export in mind. Workshops in many cities in Japan raced to produce this style to satisfy demand from Europe and America, often producing quickly and cheaply. This particular tea ball is far from the image of Satsuma ware, which is a traditional motif such as autumn grass or chrysanthemum or gorgeous concrete painting of gold. At the World Fair held in Paris in 1867, the Satsuma domain participated in an independent pavilion separated from the Edo shogunate and appealed its existence to the world. Many Satsuma wares were exhibited there as traditional crafts, and the South Kensington Museum, the predecessor of the Victoria and Albert Museum in England, bought about 30 works. The museum still holds a part of it. This ball is one of them. Despite this situation, there were artists such as Makuzu Kozen, who maintains the highest artistic standards while also successfully exporting. This is a ball made in 1881. This is not a T-ball, but I like to introduce this one here as an example of pottery in this era. His work strongly influenced Western perception of Japanese design. Technical and artistic innovations turned pottery into one of the most internationally successful Japanese decorative art forms. Next one is Taisho Showa. By the late 19th century, with the development of machinery and new technologies, the age of mass production started, and the potter's art suffered consequently. At the same time, many of these artist potters arrived at their innovations by way of continuous experiment with materials and techniques. Some sought inspiration from primitive types of Japanese pottery. Based on this background, I like to raise some elements or points influencing to make tea balls in this era. One of them is Minge Movement, which is a Japanese folklore movement. Second one is pottery travels to the world, East meets West in the 20th century. With new technique, started pursuing the originality. This picture shows Bernard Leach, Shoji Hamada, Soetsu Yanagi. They influenced the Japanese folklore movement, which is called Minge. Japanese pottery strongly influenced British studio potter Bernard Leach, who is regarded as the father of British studio pottery. He lived in Japan from 1909 to 1920 during the Taisho era, and became the leading Western interpreter of Japanese pottery, and in turn influenced a number of artists abroad. Bernard Leach and Shoji Hamada set up the Leach Pottery in 1920 in England and made tea bowls. This is done by Bernard Leach. His tea bowl is highly valued ceramic form closely linked with Japan and becoming increasingly popular in contemporary Western ceramics as a combination of Western and Eastern arts and philosophies. His work focused on traditional Korean, Japanese, and Chinese pottery in combination with traditional techniques from England and Germany, such as slipware and salt glaze ware. This is made by Shoji Hamada. This is another tea bowl made by Shoji Hamada. His work was influenced by a wide variety of folk ceramics, including English medieval pottery, Okinawan stoneware, and Korean pottery. His works were not merely copies of the style he studied, but were unique products of his own creative energy. Hamada's great respect for artisan crafts led him to draw as much as possible from folk traditions. He also demonstrated a wide range of painterly glazing, using such trademark glazes as tenmok iron, nuka, rice husk ash glaze, and kaki persimmon glaze. Through frequent visits, exhibitions, and demonstrations abroad, Hamada influenced many Western potters, and he was designated a living national treasure in 1955. Another example of East meets West in the 20th century. This pink bowl was made by British artist Lucy Lee. She established her own style that resonated with trends at the leading edge of architecture and design at the time. Color and decoration were brought together in the forms she created on her will. She was influenced by Japanese pottery and Bernard Leach. There's an interesting story between Lucy Lee and Bernard Leach. Lucy Lee was strongly devoted to the light and thin style created by the electric pottery kiln, while Leach was devoted to the heavy Japanese style created by the strong fire and earthen kiln. So, in the beginning, Lee received severe criticism from Leach, and since then, Lee had a great deal of suffering from the artistic side as well as the economic side. Recalling those days, she said, "It was the days of cabbage, that is, the day of eating only cabbage and having no money." However, she continues to search for her own direction without compromising her style, and eventually establish a unique, delicate, and graceful style by drawing lines and glazes by inlaying and scraping, and a theoretical construction method based on precise component measurement. Later on, she has been recognized and recommended by Leach. Okay, next is the last chapter, current. In this era, many master potters no longer worked at major or ancient kilns, but are making tea bowls in various parts of Japan, and they became more globally influenced among potters, and tea bowls became expressive in medium of expression. This is a tea bowl made by Jikinu Raku Kichizaemon 15th. He is the 15th generation of the Raku family, who has been a tea bowl maker since 16th century. Jikinu was born in 1949 in Kyoto. After graduating from the Tokyo University, of the Arts in 1973. He studied in Italy for 2 years at the Accademia della Belle Arti di Rome. In 1981, he succeeded to the name of Raku Kichizaemon, becoming the 15th member of the Raku clan to head the family. His technique is rooted in tradition, but has taken a big step toward modernity. In particular, by making full use of the technique of burning, he has built up an avant-garde style that can be said to be sculptural by bold shaping. This is an interesting collaborative exhibition between Jikinu and Russian artist Kazimir Malevich at Sagawa Art Museum in Japan. In 2015, Jikinu encountered many Russian avant-garde works, including Malevich, during the exhibition The Universe in the Ball, which has held in Russia. Among them, Malevich's work Black Square was impressed by the fact that it was similar to Chojiro's Black Tea Ball. Chojiro was the first generation of Raku family line in the 16th century. Malevich had a great influence on the development of abstract art and minimalism in the 20th century through his idea of sprematism. Jikinu found commonality in the Raku tea balls that are trying to go beyond the ultimate expression by removing various elements of expression, such as modeling and color, that are seen in recent direct works. This is a black Raku tea bowl made by Chojiro in the early 17th century. You can see here why Jikinu found commonality between Malevich and Chojiro, who was a founder of Rakuware. Rakuware is a type of ceramic highly esteemed in the Japanese tea ceremony. It is a lightweight glazed earthenware molded by hand, rather than thrown on a potter's wheel. The clay is rough and unpretentious, covered in an opaque glaze, as you see here. I placed the pictures together. From left, Jikinu's tea bowl, Malevich's black square, and Chojiro's black raku tea bowl. From here, I'd like to introduce some contemporary tea bowls, which became expressive in medium of expression by the artist. As you see, Takuro Kuwata is a radical potter who nevertheless describes his work as firmly grounded within the traditions of ceramics. He is known for a number of experimental procedures, including adding stones to his clay mix so that when fired, they burst or puncture the clay structure, or using needles to catch the glaze of vessel so that it creates a bumpy texture when it is fired. He leaves the final form of the work to chance, but he is careful to ensure that each piece is still functional. This is done by Alistair White. This table is named Hiroshima. This is to mark the 70th anniversary of the dropping the bomb in Hiroshima. This red glaze as an ash glaze. He uses human ash for this glaze. Tom Sachs is an American contemporary artist who lives and works in New York City. He has produced tea bowls as you see in the tea ceremony. but with one key difference: the red NASA logo on the side. This produces a coalition of worlds: tradition and technology, East and West. He made sometimes incorporating gold seams called kintsugi, by which breakages are highlighted through the act of repair. So, in the contemporary tea bowl, I could say new text, new purpose, new technique, new aesthetics, and new meanings are added to the traditional ones. Now, I'd like to close my presentation here. Thank you. Okay, from here, we like to talk about the actually slide is a little bit forwarded. Can we back to the new text, new purpose, new technique? Next one. Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, go ahead, Hatsuko-san.
Yeah. So we just wanted to chat about the recent tea party we held. We have tried a different setting because in a modern world, it is hard to have your own tea room in your home. So we had to improvise. So one of the way we did was just used a dining table, and we had multiple tea bowls, and we had mixed and matched the type of tea bowls we use. One, we had mixed tea bowl from 17th century Vietnam with the modern soup bowl from Hermes. So, and we had mixed it with the I think modern Seldenware Seiji tea bowl as well. So we used antique from Norway along with the with Bloomingdale teapot. So so I think in the modern tea, we use different tea artifacts, or we repurpose different objects from different countries, and we try to use it in tea ceremony, is what I think. What do you think?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, we enjoy mixing up everything, not only the tea bowl, but also other utensils, but in order to enjoy the tea and share with the guest.
Yeah.
So that, some people think that it's kind of difficult to start tea because, we don't have the tea bowls, or we don't have the whisk, or we don't have a proper tea utensils. But in a modern society, modern life, you can find anything. Like you can use the spoons or teapot and whatever you have, your favorite one, and then make a tea at the kitchen, or you don't have to have a tatami mat rooms. You can
Right.
you can make a tea in the living room or even kitchen in a daily life, or
Yeah.
sometimes like even Christmas party, like like with the tea as well as the like a cake, and then the Western tea or Japanese tea or matcha. You can enjoy it. The tea bowl, whatever
Yeah.
you like. Yes. Can you see? Can you go to? We're gonna next slide. Yes. This is more close up to the utensil we use at the tea party, tea gathering at the Hatsuko's place. Yeah, would you explain a little bit?
Yeah. So the left one, the one with the green leaf with gold, you can see sort of the influence of Satsuma ware, right? And or even karamono with the gold rim with symmetric shape. That's actually Hermes soup bowl or salad bowl. So I repurpose it for tea party. And you see, it's not a tea bowl, but you see this tea container in the back that it's glass. It's actually candle holder. And I just had the order the wood lid to be made to contain tea. And on the right, you see the 17th century Vietnam unknown tea bowl. And that had been chipped, and I had built it with gold lacquer.
So we'd like to close our presentation. And then so the next is the Q&A. Would you like to, Michael, would you like to initiate, facilitate it?
Very good. Well, thank you very much for this fascinating presentation, the two of you.
Thank you very much.
A wonderful description of some of the forces that that shaped, no pun intended, that shaped the different styles of bowls.
Yeah.
And we would like to give our guests here an opportunity to ask anything of our presenters. So do we have any questions? Please raise your hand. We're Victoria or Lisa, Meryl, Yasko.
This is
This
Lisa.
is-
I was trying to find my unmute button. I'm sorry it took so long.
It's okay.
I just wanted to say that the final few slides were so enlightening and freeing, because I've spent time in Japan and I had done also, and I have everything, but I'm always so nervous. I do it for myself, but to do it for other people is this was just delightful and freeing and just as beautiful and just as important. And so thank you so much for opening a whole new world for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, yeah, I think people tend to be so strict when they think about tea. You know, people are a little bit intimidated, but it's just a drink. You know, as long as you have a green powder and hot water, not even hot, you can make it. So I think, you know, I think it's, we gotta improvise, and we gotta be able to enjoy, not so intimidated by what should be. We should enjoy what we have. That's how we feel about it.
Very good.
And it to me, it really showed the bowls, you know, more
Yeah.
so even than the ritual of the tea or the beverage.
Yeah.
It was, each bowl was so wonderful to see and probably to hold, you know, so.
Yeah. I think there were a lot of tea bowls that I have that I never really used it during tea ceremony, because I you know, it didn't have that sort of heaviness, or it didn't have that sort of wow factor. But nevertheless, you know, there were things that I had memories, you know, things that I bought from different trips. So I was able to showcase everything and enjoyed it. And actually, I made all my guests made their own tea, so I could relax and enjoy the tea party. I cheated, but it was a good way to cheat.
Yes.
Son, would you have any comment to that, Lisa's comments?
Yes, I appreciate her comment, and then as she says that, you know, I hope, you know, people can more enjoy the tea with the tea bowls. And since we call it like a tea ceremony, it's maybe kind of like, you know, intimidating some people, because everybody thinks that, oh, tea ceremony is like more strict, or someone has to have some manner. But I like to, of course, there's certain place, and then, you know, to be restricted. But in the daily life, especially in the modern society or modern life, I like to, you know, the people find favorite tea bowls and enjoy the tea.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? Let's see who. Yes, go ahead, Lisa.
This is just sort of an aside. When I was in Japan and I was at one of the temples and they did a tea ceremony, one of the tea bowls had, and I had never seen this before, I've never seen it since, had carvings on the inside. So when you drank the tea, it left a residue of the wet powder in these crevices, and it created a mountainous landscape inside the bowl that was like, so the bowl unfortunately was not for sale. I would have taken it home immediately, but I have never forgotten it. It was like 20 years ago, you know, it was just like the most, so someday I'm going to make, my teacher, my pottery teacher was apprenticed to Bernard Leach and knew Hamada. So, but someday I'm going to go back to making tea bowls and I'm going to make a mountain tea, a green tree mountain tea bowl. So anyway, thank you. I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you. Some of our guests, any comment? Victoria? Meryl?
I had a question. I actually I thought it was a very good, a beautiful presentation to cover so much time in a short period of time. The last 50 years, it seems, was like a blip in this whole thing. And I was just wondering, do you feel that that section of 50 years is still in development, or has it kind of like evolved into something slower? I mean, is it pointing to something different that you see over the past 500 years?
I think, you know, we were, Hisashi and I were chatting, you know, as we were organizing it, that influence of Western culture definitely has, you know, big shift in Japanese culture. You know, before Meiji era, I think Japan was looking to China, Chinese literature as a common cultural influence. Now, after Edo culture, it all shifted. And I think in this modern last 50 years, like in my lifetime almost, you know, it really has accelerated to the point that Chinese culture, one that used to be more dominant force, has really, that's, you know, most people don't know it. We didn't study. When I was studying Chinese literature in Japanese high school, I slept and I read cartoon. I thought they were so irrelevant. So, you know, cultural shift has changed so much. And I think that's, and the lifestyle has changed. I don't know of any friend in Japan, except very, very few people own tatami room, you know, so the lifestyle has drastically changed, is what I think. What do you think, Hisashi?
I think but the thing that we just changed the direction, maybe recent, like 50 years. So we're looking at more Western culture, but in our mind, since Japan is really such small island, and so and a kind of stable the government or the life, so that we always looking for something overseas. So is that maybe China or Korea, and then by generation we change direction, and now it's time to see more like not only the Western culture but the global the cultures. So is that we are more like intensively influence each other's, not only the lifestyle but the arts and then the those kind of stuff, and then which is I think influence to the tea bowls as well.
I think that's a very interesting discussion. Japan has a long history from the time that the tea came from China. It came in powdered as in the form of powdered tea, and the ceremony, the tea ceremony that we call it, the developed from that Chinese style, but it changed. There's no tea ceremony as such comparable to the Japanese tea ceremony in China. Japan was able to take something from overseas and change it into something very Japanese. And I think that probably we can see that in the Showa and the Meiji Showa area tea bowls. There's some of them are quite different, but they're bowls. They're bowls that you drink tea out of. So they're shaped, taken from somewhere else and shaped into something that's very Japanese. And I find that fascinating.
I agree with that. Yes.
Any other comment or question? If not, I think we should thank our two presenters today and invite you to come back on the fourth Tuesday of next month at 7 o'clock, where we will talk about temae, about the procedures, the traditional procedures for creating the cup of tea with a very interesting creative take on that. It's called the Muan Muan no Cha, tea without a bowl. So look forward to that next month. And thank you all again, and have a good evening.
Yes, thank you. And
Thank
please,
you very much.
please stay in touch to the Hammond Museum and actually all the other events that we'll have in the Hammond Tea Club, as well as all the other activities at Hammond Museum. And we look forward to having you live instead of virtual, because this is the best time right now to sort of like get together, coming out of the crazy pandemic into slowly back to normal. So we hope this will help.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
ありがとうございました。
はい。
ありがとうございました。